Today, I am thrilled to have Andrew Kaufman with me. I first came across Andrew's work when one of my husband's friends gifted him the book All My Friends Are Superheroes. And I promptly stole it, read it, completely fell in love with it. And ever since, have really loved reading Andrew's work, including things like Born Weird and the Waterproof Bible. So I'm very excited to ask Andrew all the craft based questions today. But before we dive in, Andrew, is there anything else people should know about you and your work?
um yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean,
No.
I think if this is going to be a master class on comedy, I should probably
Yeah.
start with admitting I never intentionally make things funny. I can tell when
Mm.
something is funny, but I don't have any secrets at all about like I don't know why something is funny. So
Mm.
let's see if we can figure something out over the
Yeah.
next
Well,
40.
that's perfect. Because I actually wanted to start there because, like, for example, one of the reviews of All My Friends Are Superheroes said it's one of the saddest, funniest, strangest, and most romantic books, which I was like, what an amazing combination. And that's that comes up in so many reviews that your books are so sad and so funny, which I think is why I'm really drawn to them. Because although we use the term comedy very broadly, I don't mean in that like laugh a minute sense. I mean in that sense that there is the lightness, there is the play, there is the delight that makes all kinds of really sad situations bearable. So that was actually
Yeah.
going to be my first question: is just how conscious that is for you or not. Like, do you ever end up sitting there with a scene and thinking, "Oh, I want to inject more humor into this to lighten it," or conversely, kind of be there thinking, "Oh, I want to." Actually, this is getting too funny. I want to ground it and take it back the other way. Or is it quite an unconscious process for you?
I mean, it is pretty unconscious, although I am aware. I think I'm Canadian, and
Okay.
one of the real sort of um, national, one of the few national characteristics we really have is that we do tend to use humor
Hmm.
to deal with everything. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's positive or negative. If
Hmm.
there's a lot of poppy thing going on. So if you're like getting a little big too big for your britches in Canada, humor is going to take you down. Or if you're overwhelmed by a horrible situation, well, humor is going to be what cuts that situation down, makes you able to manage it, right? So I do think that's just part of being Canadian. As far as the writing goes, I don't ever consciously say I'd like to have a funny scene. In fact, more often than not, I have to admit that there are people who find lines in my books really funny, and
Hmm.
it wasn't intentional. For the for the writing, one of the things I do with the prose is because it's magic realism, because it's really asking a lot of the reader. I ask a lot of the reader to suspend their disbelief. And so I use these short sentences that uh just kind of clop along and don't aren't demanding a lot of the reader. Hopefully it feels like it's downward. But because of that, there's actually a lot of space in between what gets said and what isn't said. And I'm very conscious of the fact that in my work, I know it's funny and the reader knows it's funny, but the text doesn't know it's funny. And somehow those two being on the same side or of the actual thing that you're reading, I don't know if this is making any sense at all, but
It
that's
is.
sort of like what I try to go for. So I will increase the humor. It's all these in writing is like when it comes right down to it, it's just everyone's using the same 26 characters, right? So it's like who knows how it works, but there is a sense that I'm conscious of, and when I'm building it, when I'm editing it, I can feel it. I can feel when I'm starting to
Mm,
get to that point where the reader can tell that the writer knows it's funny, and the
mm,
reader will think it's funny, but the actual words on the page
mm.
aren't. Well, I say aware as if it's a living thing, but
Yeah.
they never consciously point out and say, "Hey, you're supposed to find this funny." And I think that's how my prose writing is the best. Does that make sense?
It does. And honestly, that answer just delights my brain thinking of the text as this kind of third
Yeah,
character. Because I like in some ways, I see what you're saying. It doesn't sound logical, but that's absolutely right. And
yeah.
that I think that is where the game is and in that conversation. But like you say, it's not the text has like this love for me, this lovely tension between being so incredibly straightforward and, like you say, asking a big jump in terms of the reader. And
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
just something so delightful in that. And that was actually going to be my next question for you, is what labels do you feel comfortable with that people put on your work? Because it can be tricky for different writers being labeled, but it's needed for marketing and different things.
Oh,
So is magical
100%.
realism the term that you feel most comfortable with, do you think?
I hate that term, and I don't
Do
think it
you?
is. I mean, you call it whatever you want. If you're actually going to
Yeah. No.
talk about my work, I'm
Mm,
fine with it. You call it, you say what magic realism, you say what you want. Um,
mm,
Magic realism, I think, is from my understanding, is just become a catch-all for
mm,
any sort of fiction that isn't realistic. So if you
mm,
have metaphoric stuff, or you have characters, like I have talking frogs, I have people who fly, I have
mm,
all that sort of stuff in my work. So it gets called magic realism because people just don't know what else to call it. Where
mm,
in actuality, magic realism is like, it's Latin American and it's
mm-hmm,
Catholic, right? Like it's a really
mm,
specific genre from a specific time and a specific place. And
mm,
I'm neither Catholic nor uh, Latino. So I'm not comfortable with the word magic realism. I would never self-identify, but if you want to use that, that's totally fine. For me,
mm,
what they are is parables. But when you say parable,
mm,
you instantly people hear Jesus and New Testament
mm,
and all those sort of stories, right? So, um, so there's that. But yeah, if you look at the work, I'm actually stealing the structure of like Aesop's fables, or those the small stories. There's some sort of setup, and then what happens has some sort of easily articulated uh point of view or piece of information at the end of it, right? And all
mm,
the best stories and all my friends are superheroes and the tiny wife, and what I consider my best work operates under that
mm,
structure. So I would say they're allegorical. It's an
mm.
allegorical narrative. It's fable-esque, but people do those words. I mean, they're fairy tales, right? Like, let's just get down to it. I would love to call them fairy tales, but again, everyone thinks uh, Hansel and Gretel and that they're kids literature. So the marketing reminds me a bit of like uh, I'm 55, so I grew up listening to new wave music, which
Mm,
in Britain was called post-punk, but in North America, no one, they couldn't market punk over here, so they just came up with a new phrase to say, "Oh, it's new wave," and so it feels a bit like that because I think there's a
mm,
lot of like, what do you call George Saunders? What do you call Amy Bender?
mm,
You know what I mean? There's a lot of writers, contemporary writers, uh, who are also writing in a fantastical, in a fabulous way, that
mm.
it get called magic realism. And I, anyway, I'm rambling, but yeah, I would say that it's like that it's just fable-esque.
Yeah, I love that. And again, it's that thing where it
Hold on, I
is.
left my headphones.
Yeah, no worries. Do you want to have a little reset of your?
Wait, I can't hear a thing.
It's
I lost
okay.
both of them. Sorry.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I think what it is was when you started talking about the text like being its own person,
Yes.
you blew the mind so much that the earbuds just popped out. So
Well,
it's all
yeah.
good.
It's the text is the straight man is what it turns
Yeah.
into. Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
Okay, that's exactly it. No, but that makes so much sense. And again, I that's my perception of reading them as well, is that they read like fables, but all of these words become so loaded because then, like
yeah,
you say, it's not like Aesop's fables, and like you say, parable, yes, but not from the Bible. And so again, like when people are just trying to put one word on it, again, I've seen your work described as fantasy, and it's
yeah.
like it's fantastical, but fantasy is also very loaded.
There's
So
no
yeah,
dragons, although maybe, and there's no sword. It's not sword and sorcery, right? I think
yeah.
it's closer to fantasy than it is anything else.
Mm.
Um, but because it's been picked up as a literary thing,
Hmm.
right? Magic
Yeah.
realism is a still a posh word. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You
Okay.
get put in the fancy part of the bookstore if
Right.
you're called magic realism as opposed to the
Yeah.
genre stuff over here, right?
And yeah, and interesting. But then as soon as you put superheroes with it as well, then you get the kind of
Yeah,
popularity with it too, which I think is great. But
100%. Yeah, yeah.
And so you mentioned George Saunders.
Yeah,
Who else, as writers or creators, do you really enjoy? I know it's a big question, but
it
I'm asking
is.
all guests because we get a couple of recommendations, and I always then selfishly go and read them or watch them.
I so so there's a couple American writers, one of whom's really embarrassing that I have to like totally acknowledge. In fact, they're both kind of embarrassing. I wish I had better literary taste. I'm not going to talk about like the super fancy. Anyway, I love Kurt Vonnegut. I love Kurt.
Oh, yeah.
I think he's super funny. I think his dealing with sadness and tragedy is
Mm,
fabulous, and I think he's got really good things to say.
yeah.
He's got a really positive message
Mm,
in from a really cynical voice. It's beautiful mix. And then I like an American writer called Richard Brodigan, which was super big in the '60s. He wrote a book called well, my favorite book of his is In Watermelon Sugar,
mm,
which is this amazing. I love it, love it. I highly can recommend that. Some of his other work is Hot and Cold, but he was a hippie, and he
mm,
was a real hardcore hippie. And then when the '60s ended, he was kind of like thrown out with the whole, institution, or I don't know if he's an institution. But anyway, he fell out
yeah.
of favor. And for a while, when I was going to university in the late '80s, uh, he was a very popular writer amongst people who wanted to become writers. But since then,
Mm.
he's really fallen out of favor. I think he's like used to seeing in used bookstores. That used to be the hardest thing to find, and now he's totally gone. So
Right. I'm definitely
contemporary,
gonna have
yeah.
to look him up.
In Watermelon Sugar, I can totally stand. Still recommend. The Hawkline Mystery, I would also still recommend. He's got some books that haven't aged well. So, but they're
Yeah.
totally like that. Yeah,
But sometimes it's interesting just to read things in their context as well. So,
yeah,
so that's great. And I am really not a fan of any kind of snobbery around art. I just think we should just love what we love. I have a
yeah.
section on my website called Stash, and the only rule for me is that I love it. So whatever I love goes in there, and I don't really care what everyone else thinks. So that's great.
I have a
Awesome.
huge thing for detective fiction. Uh,
Right.
and I
Yeah.
just love it so much. And it's like every third book I read, I have to make myself read other books so I don't just read like noir stuff from the '50s that I absolutely love. So there's that
Oh,
too.
wonderful. Yeah, no, that's great. And I can see then how that makes that like special mix with yours for things like the ticking heart. So,
Yeah. Ticking Heart
yeah.
is I couldn't keep the barn door closed on how much I loved it.
Yeah.
I mean
Good.
that is a by the numbers uh detective story from the '50s, right? So,
But still with your really strong voice, because I do think like of all the writers that I read, you have one of the like most distinctive voices. In like if someone was like, right, we're gonna set up a bet and the game is like we're gonna lay all these books out and you're gonna open them and not read the covers, like which author are you gonna go for being able to think, oh, I think that's their book. And you are one of those writers where I think that in the best possible way.
oh,
Because
well,
even though
that's
they
nice to hear.
are really different and they are um we still just get such different characters, such distinctive characters, such different worlds, different themes. So it's not that they're similar in that sense, but in terms of like feeling the human behind it, I'm going to take the bet on being able to go, oh, okay, I want the Andrew Kaufman challenge. So I wanted to, that was one of my questions for you is, I know it can be really hard to self-interpret, but do you have any sense of how you got through that process to develop such a distinctive voice, like what that was like for you, where
Yeah,
you
I
started, how it emerged.
totally know what happened. I used to have so I I've written every day since I was 18. And I didn't
Mm,
get anything published. I've had a really hard time getting anything published. Um, and so I took my best story and sent it to a magazine called Blood and Afters, Canadian periodical. It doesn't exist anymore, but at the time it was like the one. And so I was like, okay, just forget the New Yorker, forget Granta. I was just like, boom, gonna gonna do this. And I got a rejection letter, and the editor of the time was a guy named Ken Sparling, a Canadian writer. Uh, and he had taken the first 3 pages and he had stroked out everything. Let's say there's 250 words on a page, it would be like 30 pages. There are 30 words left on every page. Everything else would have been stroked out. And I was like, and I wasn't even offended, right? I was just sort of like, well, this is so ludicrous. I'm just going to laugh at this. But then I kept thinking about it and I kept thinking about it. And so I printed the story out again and I did what he'd done to the rest of the pages. And all of a sudden it was like, well, that totally makes sense. Like,
Mm.
because of the way these stories roll out, because they're so emotional, because they're dealing with allegory, I think the language
Mm.
has got to be really simple. The rhythm has to be seductive. The sequence of information has to be really straightforward. Uh, and that's it. Just sort of came out of that. Now, I now have sentences with more than one clause, but I'm
Mm.
6 books in before I've done that. And every time I sit down to write a book, I always sit down saying, again, I'm going to do a lot of description, and I'm going to have
Mm.
long, complicated sentences, and I'm going to make those really beautiful turns of phrase that real writers do. And I write a draft like that, and then I read it, and I just hate it. I hate it so much. And then I like rewrite it until it has that really straightforward style.
Mm.
It's just the way it
And
feels right.
yeah, and I'm wondering, so this is the theory I'm developing just now, but they're your books, so you tell me if I'm off with this, that if there is something around, um, like you say, both the sort of the simplicity of the construction of sentences that means that you can absorb it, but the
Yeah.
care with the rhythm of it means that you can, or a brain like mine with your books, I can like almost absorb the visuals and the characters and respond in real time to the delight in the play and the comedy of it in a way that's nothing to do with like snarky dialogue or sarcasm. It's not those things, it's the actual like visual play. Whereas when someone writes with like much more clauses and complicated sentences and wrap down, I'm in my head very intellectually, and I tend not to find things as funny because
Yeah.
I'm at more of a remove. Whereas your books, I'm always so emotionally invested
Yeah.
in the sadness too, the heartache too, the awkwardness too. But that means when the comedy comes, it just like whaps me one sentence, and I will have a reaction to the humor in a much stronger way than I do in books that have a lot more like evidently constructed word
Yeah.
verbiage, if that makes sense.
I mean, in reality, it's just being really manipulative because
Okay.
the sentences are so small and
Mm.
short and straightforward. You don't
Mm.
realize how much information I'm giving you, right?
Yeah.
I am describing how red the apple is,
Mm-hmm.
right? But you don't. I don't know. I need a better. I can't really give you a better example, but it's like because you're getting all these short pieces of
Mm.
information, you can stop looking at how they're connection and
Mm-hmm.
how the sequence of which I've given them
Mm.
changes the way you see them in their mind, the way you feel about them. And that can
Mm-hmm.
be really, really powerful. At least I hope it is. I think that really works for me. And then the
Yeah.
other thing is it just sort of seduces you into thinking that you're not being, because
Mm.
you're digesting
Mm.
these small bits again and again and again. And
Mm.
then when the frogs start talking, you're much more likely just to accept it as well. And
Yeah.
and because again, the text is not questioning it. The
Yeah.
the text is just giving you that information as if it's one more factual detail. And I think
Exactly.
that's something that really worked well for me. Is just
Yeah.
I mean, it's a technique, right?
It is, but it's not one that I see lots of writers use, and
Well,
certainly not in the way that you do. We don't
it
have like, oh, there's the woman with green skin driving the car, and we just accept it straight away. Like when I think
yeah,
of other genres, we don't get that directness.
yeah. I mean, I think oh oh, I'm not a writer that is. I'm not fancy. I'm not full of fireworks. Do you know what I mean? And also it's like I'm not. putting myself down at all,
Mm,
because
mm-mm.
it's super hard to get everything to be that
Mm,
simple. Like I
I
work
know.
really hard to make it seem so simple.
Yeah.
Uh, but I'm not the writer that's like, I barely know how to use a semicolon. My,
Mm,
my I don't really have the poetics of what I do are in the narrative structure. They're not in how the words sit on the page. I'm not someone who, uh, I don't think there's that many people writing Andrew Kaufman quotes on their binders. Do you know what I mean? I don't think that
mm,
that's not my forte. Then again, that's why I've never had any problems, or why I've even embraced the word parable, right? Because I
mm-hmm,
think the highest compliment I can do is to create a story that can
mm,
exist on its own without, right? Like, just,
mm-hmm,
I would love that, to think that, you know, these little tiny stories, because the story means what it is, right? You can interpret it, but the telling for me takes away from the actual story if it's too fancy.
mm-hmm.
I don't know a better
Yeah.
word than fancy, but
Yeah.
that's it.
I can appreciate that. And so I wanted to ask you again, when you're talking about the parable, about your characters and how you develop them and how you kind of observe and filter people that you see in the world and how that feeds into your process. Because um, to my mind, from reading your books, you're both brilliant at like putting characters into types and doing that very blatantly. For example, in All My Friends Are Superheroes, we will literally have like the falling girl or the battery, but they're not your usual types. So we're not talking about just the usual tropes that we see out there. They're very distinct observations that you've taken and put into a type for us to absorb. And you're also really great at developing like really distinctive characters, say within a family unit for Born Weird, where each is very distinct and you know exactly who they are as soon as they start to speak. So I'd love to know more generally, like how you think about the characters as you're creating them, how you like to approach them.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate you saying that. I think my characterization is the area that I should work on the most. But well, here I'll answer that in two ways. One, all my friends superhero started as a zine. I don't know. Do you know what I mean by a
Mm,
zine? Okay, so I had a zine called
yes.
Scruffy, and I had a special issue was called uh, "If My Friends Were Superheroes," where I literally took all my friends and turned
Mm,
them into a superhero, which is became the middle parts in the books between the sections.
mm,
Um, and so that's how that book started, and it was just so much fun. I kept going, worked it
mm,
into the novella. But overall, I always start. I have such a hard time naming characters. So I start
mm,
working on a project. I have story before I have characters, and
mm,
then as I'm working through the story and I'm working through the people who are in the story, eventually there'll be a point where it's like, oh, this is Carrie, or oh, this
mm,
is Michael, or do you know what I mean? I realize that the character is a lot like somebody I know,
mm,
and then that's usually when I get the fake name or the name, and then I just write them as if they really are this friend of mine.
mm,
So, uh, so that's the process for me. I'm not one of the writers who, I mean, yeah, I don't have characters that jump into my head fully formed.
mm.
All my characters are based on people that I love a lot.
Yeah.
And that's how it works for me. I know it's the same thing when I get that point where I can feel like the text can stand on its own. And it's not, you know what I mean? That we were talking about
Yeah.
what gets to the straight man point. I think that I have the same feeling for my characters when I figure out who they are in real
Mm,
life. When I figure out who, well, yeah, that's Dave. And so then all of
yeah.
a sudden their decisions make more sense. And I mean, it's it's obviously more complicated than that, because I think it would be impossible to actually write a character that's based on a person that actually it's that person 100%. Because I only know, even my closest friends, I know only in specific point of view, right? There are different families, there's different work, there all that sort of stuff, right? So I'm really
Mm,
only seeing them through the lens of my friendship. But uh, and I mean, to prove the point, rarely do the people who I've based a character on think that they're the people that I've based a character on. Usually they think it's someone else, which is great. Love that so much. So anyway, that's my process.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I love that you bring like that sense of a lot of love to it. And again, I think it gives that coherent stamp that is just means it would be very hard to replicate your work, even if it's someone else was going to be like, oh, I'm also going to have fantastical elements, or I'm also going to use really simple sentences. Like that, you can. I just feel like when I read your books, you can just feel like the beating heart of the human behind them in a way that I love. Like, for example, I also I find Ray Bradbury really inspiring as a writer,
Yeah,
in the sense that I think he's also quite unabashed and unashamed about writing about feelings. And
yeah.
then it doesn't have to be like the minutiae of feelings. It's not that we then dissect one, but that he's happy to bring all that to it, all the joy, all the sadness, all the terror in that really open, big-hearted way, which I really love. And I really love, I think part of the reason I'm drawn to your books as well is that really wonderful contribution, like combination of high level feeling, but done in a way that I can experience. Because sometimes when things like, I'm not great actually at watching like drama films that
I
are
can't either. Half the
about,
time I have
because
to
it
turn it
just,
off.
yeah, it's
It's
just
too
too
painful.
too
I
much.
can't see the
Yes,
horrible things happen to this guy. I've never been able to
exactly.
make it through Breaking Bad. I've never
Yeah.
made it through The Sopranos. It's just like
Mm,
it's just nothing but horrible things are gonna happen to this guy. I just
yeah.
it's so I hear what you're saying. I mean that's why that is honestly why I like Allegory so much. I feel like it
Mm,
articulate. I personally think Allegory can articulate emotional situations better than
mm,
realism. I don't think realism
mm,
gets it. If I'm on a date, if I'm on a first date and we're having dinner and I describe the menu and how she's playing with her phone and all that sort of stuff, that does a certain extent that tells me the date's not going well. But if
mm,
I'm at the table and the date grows wings and flies away, then that's
mm,
then that's more powerful to me. That's the same
mhm,
story, and as the person left alone at the table, that you know what I mean, that hurt,
mhm,
that abandonment, all that sort of stuff is going to be so much stronger if
mm,
it's exaggerated into an allegorical situation, because both the realism
mm,
version of that and the allegorical version of that still have two people on the table and one leave, right?
mm,
So
mhm,
why is it powerful if she says, oh, my babysitter just canceled, I have to go, right? Like that
mm.
isn't as powerful to me as if she just turns into mist,
Yeah.
right? So yeah.
I'm 100% with you on that. And thank you. You've given me so much more language to put around why I like that. Because honestly, like it might sound kind of silly, but I wouldn't have really thought to use the word allegory about some of the things I like. But as soon as you describe it, it's like that. But that's actually what it is. And
That's what
it's
it is.
that,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So that's awesome. So we've sort of touched on it a little bit, like those big feelings, and I think you've already sort of partially answered this. Like, I'm curious though how like humor and heartbreak fit together for you in the kind of themes that you choose to write about. Um, like, I think from my perspective, for example, I just feel like they're so hard to separate. So, like you said, I don't know if it's the Canadian thing, if it comes with it all, or if it's too hard to bear without. But why for you do you think that they are fused? If you think they are, in a way that makes people say your books are like the saddest and the funniest, and there's always
I
both.
it well, yeah, so I'd say there's two things. One is,
Okay.
and this comes from my family, and if you've read Born Weird,
Mm.
this is this book especially, but my family tends to my family are all emotional. We're all very
Mm.
strong feelers. Uh and we do use the metaphor I've always used is that we kind of use humor as oven mitts. So there's
Mm.
something super hot on the stove, and
Mm.
there's a crisis. It's got to go off the stove or whatever, and so the oven mitts are what it allows us to grab that. And so
Mm.
that's I grew up with that. That's what humor is for. That's what humor is
Mm.
there for. Uh, and how and you can do amazing things if you have you're still going to have to unpack that. It's still going to be emotional down the road. But during that moment of crisis, that's a wonderful way to keep the wheels turning, right? So,
Mm.
so that's definitely an instinct. Uh, and the other thing is that it's just, I find so much of the world just so absurd that it's
Mm.
funny. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like the things that the horrible, horrible things. When you think about the probability of that happening, when you think about the like just the comic timing of tragedy, like
Mm.
it's it's unbelievable that it happened this way, it happened.
Mm.
And there's just something about all of us. We're just small, weak people. We don't
Mm.
have scales. We don't really have claws. Like we humans
Mm.
have no survival skills other than our brain, right? Like
Yeah.
we're just meat. We're just meat
Yes.
walking around waiting to be eaten, right? And it's like, and we're trying so hard. We have cars and jobs, and we're being fancy, and we're doing everything we can to consider ourselves significant and have these
Mm.
significant lives. And then, boom, a spare tire changes everything.
Mm.
And that's
Mm.
funny, right? That's funny
Yeah.
to me that all so much effort and so much plans and so much care can be completely undone with something as simple as a patch of ice, a banana
Mm.
peel. You know what I mean? Like it's like
100%.
it's just it just and it and there's a release in that too. I think it's like we think in our culture. God, I'm really going on, but I'm almost done. But in
I
our
love it.
culture, we really think that we're in control, right?
Mm.
We think that
Mm.
what happens to you is of your own making. That you're
Mm.
working hard, therefore you'll succeed. That you know what I mean? Like you're a good person, so good things are going to happen to you. We have all these rules that prove to us that we're in control of our lives, our decisions, and the kind of things that happen to us. And it's just bullshit. And it's
Mm.
just like there's such a release when you know what I mean? Like when you can't stop in time and you run into the Volkswagen in front of you. It's like you just and now you're not gonna be at work at time. You're right. All the plans, all
Mm.
these terrible things that you worked so hard to achieve just illustrates that you have no control. You
Mm.
have no control. And so I think there's a huge release. Even in tragedy, I feel like there
Mm.
is a huge release because it forces you to say, oh, that was beyond my control. There's
Mm.
really nothing I can do about that, which is the only way you're going to get through that tragedy. And there's a huge amount of joy, even in that horrible, horrible place, of being able to face the reality because
Mm.
you can't look away from it that, yeah, I don't have as much control as I thought. I'm actually not in control. Therefore, my failures aren't 100% my own.
Mm.
Therefore, the fact that I, have not achieved my goal is not like so. That's funny. So it feels good to have that release to be proven wrong, and then it's just so unexpected, and it just proves how stupid we are to think that we can actually control it in the first place.
Yeah, I think all of what you said is so incredibly
Yep.
perceptive,
Yep.
and I'm going to carry that oven mitt analogy with me forever because it's like, yeah, that's just such a perfect way of explaining what some of those situations feel like, and
Yeah.
I also feel that too. And thank goodness for oven mitts
Yes.
because,
Oh man,
yeah, makes
we
life a
didn't
lot
have
more
them.
bearable. Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel like it. I remember when I was growing up, there was a show called Hogan's Hero. Did you have that
Mm.
in? It was this really
Possibly. I
lame.
haven't seen it.
It was a sitcom. It was a sitcom. It was a stupid
Mm.
sitcom that was set in a World War II POW camp. So it was run by
Mm.
Nazis, like actually
Okay.
Nazis wearing Nazi uniforms, right? And they
Oh,
were
wow.
always the blunt of the jokes. They were always like, they were fools and morons and bubblers. And the prisoners actually had this elaborate pathway of tunnels and secret radios, and they would go out and do, uh, you know, maneuvers. They blow up bridges and and get rid of all the Nazi airplanes and all this sort of stuff. And I've always, to me, that's always been the better way. Like right now,
Mm.
fascists are around, Nazis are around, And what are we doing? We're scared of them, right?
Mm,
We think it's
mm,
like, oh, these guys are so powerful. Oh, there's Nazis. And it's like, sort of fuck that. It's like, it
mm,
was way more powerful when we all realized that they were bumbling fools that
mm,
like could be cut down to size. That we didn't, that I just feel that they become more powerful because you become afraid of them. And if you
mm.
can laugh at them, anything you can laugh at, you're going to be able to deal with. So the fact that so that's a long way of saying, I think it's one of the beautiful things about humor is it's that it proves to you, even if that eventual
Mm,
recovery is 2 years away, 5 years away,
mm,
even if the next 3 months are going to be hell, if you can laugh at what that horrible thing is,
mm.
you're gonna succeed, or at least survive. Because
No, I think that's totally right. And I love that's true for us as humans in like really private personal senses and also in like you say political senses. And we think back to like gestures and the court and the king, like for the longest
hundred
time,
percent, yeah,
humans, yeah, have been using humor to as an amazing survival strategy that feels way better than many other things that we do when we're in pain, and also as a way to redistribute power and um, but in a fun way. So I
yeah.
love that. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. So I'd love to ask you a little bit about your writing process because your Instagram handle, manual typewriter forever, is that a joke or is that for real?
Oh, it's for real. It's
Is
scarily
it?
for real. Yeah,
Okay.
um uh I love to edit. I love to
Mm,
edit. And that's
mm,
it's like whittling. I love
mm,
taking something that's a 3,000 words and making it out. Um
mm-hmm.
all those like all my friends superheroes and the tiny wave both of books that coming around like I don't know, like less than 20K, somewhere around 50. I think like 50. But
Mm,
they started double the length, right? And it's just like I love getting it tighter and smaller. Can I make these three sentences one? Do I need
mm,
this piece of information? All I love just condensing it like I'm making maple syrup, right? Like just boiling off the
mm,
water. Love it. But because of that, I tend to do a lot of editing before I get a first draft.
mm,
So if I'm on a computer, computers are made to edit.
mm.
Fabulous, right?
Yeah.
If I'm on a typewriter, it's almost impossible to go back.
Yeah.
I'm just going forward. And then even if I do, because I'll take the paper out and write on the paper, but then it's still there. It doesn't disappear the same way it does on a computer screen. So my process is that I do a first draft from beginning to end on a typewriter. I
Mm.
have many of them.
Do you?
And yeah, I do. I have, there's, I used to buy them at Salvation Armies, thrift shops, and
Mm.
now they're like super, super expensive.
Mm.
Now they're considered antiques. But the upside of that is that there's now actually a place in Toronto that will repair them. Anyway, so I I buy nice paper, like fancy paper, way too much for paper, and then I
Mm.
type a first draft,
Mm.
and I don't make it pretty. I just
Mm.
like, here's the story, here are the characters, this is what's happens to them. And that usually takes about, well, it depends. It can be like 3 months, it can be a year, somewhere around there. And then I spend about 2 years making it
Yeah.
prettier, tighter. So that's the actual writing. And then, I mean, I'm also someone who works. I, editors are very important. Uh,
Mm.
I'm not, I'm not. There's a lot of writers who will work on a text and then be, really, really protective of the words they created, the sequence they created.
Mm.
Where I'm always like, yeah, tell me what's wrong. Tell me what needs to be improved and how to improve it, and I'll totally make it happen. So, well,
Right.
and
That's
I think,
fascinating.
sorry.
Yeah, no, you because that was actually going to be one of my final questions was about the editing process for you because I was wondering about that because in reading the books, it feels like they have just such a clear, distinct vision, such a clear, distinct voice. Just everything seems so crystal clear. I was wondering what that editing process is like for you, what you actually find helpful in terms of feedback, or is there anything that derails it? Like, what does an editor do with someone like you? Like, 'cause I would say I don't see your drafts before, but from the books, I'm like, this all just seems like it couldn't be any other way.
Oh my God, so much has changed.
Does it?
I usually like I have so every one of the books has a problem, right? There's some sort
Mm,
of metaphorical problem. Tom Tom is invisible to his wife. The wife is shrinking.
mm,
The blessing, or the grandmother's about to die. All
mm,
that sort of stuff, right? All premise, high concept.
mm,
And then so that's when I start writing, and then I usually write, and then I don't make outlines. I don't make cue cards or drafts or anything. I just start writing, and then it reveals itself. And then you have to go back again because it's so allegorical, and
mm,
because it's working with this weird dream logic. Everything has to make sense, right?
mm,
Like emotive sense or intuitive sense. I don't know how to understand it
mm,
or how to
mm-hmm,
articulate it, but it just got to feel right in your gut. If it doesn't
mm,
feel like whatever this metaphor is standing for, when it comes into action with this metaphor, the result of that has to say something and feel right. Right. So if
mm,
I'm talking about love and this and it's about distance, well then the way that's expressed has to feel like what it feels like, right?
mm.
So that is I rarely achieve that on the first draft. So go back. My editors, I mean, Alana Wilcox is my favorite editor. She was Coach F's books, and she's great because she will never actually say you should do this. She will just say in a really kind way that that I can hear. She'll just say, "I don't think this is working. This
Okay.
gets lost to me. I don't buy it. When he does this,
Mm.
I don't buy it." And my response will be, "But he has to do that because otherwise, I don't have the plot." And she's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, well, I don't know. I don't know." And she's always right. She's always right. It's like that still happens, but there's an emotional beat, or there's
Mm.
a decision that they've made because I've forced them to, rather than what really should happen. And I need to rewrite that and put it in some sort of different metaphor or some different situation so that it
Yeah.
all has. I mean, my books aren't complicated; they're straight lines, right? They're all really, um, they all start here. There's a problem, and then there's the solution. But I find it incredibly hard to maintain that straight line, right?
Mm.
It's just so hard to make everything line up perfect way.
Mm.
I mean, which is a challenge I love. And then short. And I always want it really short.
Yeah. No, I can see all the challenges and it looks beautiful and perfect when it's done, but I see how that would be so challenging because it, like you say, in some ways a straight line, but also just like you say, this perfect web of like feelings and associations. And I love the way you're describing it as like whether it's dream logic or intuitive logic,
Yeah.
but it's not dream logic in the sense of, oh, we can just all go off for a ride. Like everything
No.
ties perfectly back in.
Yeah.
It's not the like I don't know the shower scene in Dallas of the soap where there's a dream and you can get away with almost murder. So no, it has to be
But that's how
just
dreams
the
are.
right resonance.
When you
Yeah.
have a dream that you can't forget, there's a
Mm,
reason for it, right? Like you
mm,
may not be able to say why it was your best friend from high school you know,
mm,
in a Toyota 4Runner, and you went and played pinball on a mountain. You know what I mean? I'm just pulling
mm,
metaphors out,
mm-hmm.
but there's something about your brain's language that each one of those
Yeah.
symbols has an
Yeah.
association. So you wake
Yeah.
up in the morning and you feel like you have some clarity, almost like you
Mm,
understand something, just because of that combination of images that have been thrown at
yeah.
you and what the narrative is, right? So dream
Yeah.
logic, I think, is like honestly, anything can happen in real life. Real life is
Mm,
random. It's like it's uncontrollable, and and you don't really have to explain anything because everyone just goes, "Yeah, that sounds right." Even when
yeah.
crazy coincidences happen, everyone's like, "Okay, yeah, wow, crazy," right?
Mm,
No one says, "Oh, yeah, I don't buy that." Where in fiction, everything
mm,
has to be perfect. It's the other way
mm,
around. If it
mm,
if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't feel
mm,
metaphorically right, then you're gonna put the book down. I'm gonna lose
mm-hmm.
your special this week. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So I see where it's a challenge, but oh my goodness, well done. That's all I can say for pulling it off. And shout out to your editors as well. So, the last question is just any advice that you have found useful or apply.
Oh my God. I'll give you the best piece of advice that was given to
Yeah.
me. Uh,
What's that?
get a day job where you work on a
Mm.
computer and no one can see your screen.
Oh,
And
sneaky.
that
Yeah.
was like, oh, because it's super hard to make a lot of money off of fiction. The vast
Mm-hmm.
majority of fiction writers have some sort of day job.
Mm.
And if you're in a situation where you can work super hard at your day job from 9 to 11, and then spend 11 to 3 working on your novel, and then 3 to 5 making sure no one notices that you took those 4 hours off,
Yeah.
then that's an art grant.
Yeah. You're 100% right. That's great advice. I love it. Oh, well, it's been such a delight speaking with you. Thank you so much for all that you've so generously shared and giving me an insight into your brain and how you think about these things that I think can be quite elusive, but that I'm fascinated by. So I'd love to wrap up with where should people come and find you if they want to see more of your work? And of
uh,
course, I will put these in the show notes too.
yeah, okay. Well, Instagram, I'm fairly
Yeah.
regular on Instagram. My website is the uh, uh, Epiphany Detective Agency, but it's down right now. So
Oh,
I'm
no
really
worries.
bad with the website. I'm really bad with all of this stuff. So Instagram is the best place. Um,
Yeah.
and otherwise, Coach House. Coach House. Well,
Great.
CoachHouseBooks.com would be
Perfect.
the other.
We'll put those all in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, I appreciate it. It was great. It was fun.
Okay. Bye for now.